All right, we are live right now. Welcome to North Carolina Cryptid and Paranormal Project. I have Mr. Jack Cary from Paranormal Planet. We're going to be discussing cryptids and some government cover-ups that are related to these cryptids, and we might delve into some UFO stuff with disclosure as well. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can hear you.
Just want to make sure that it's showing that we're live in the group, because sometimes it takes like a 30-second delay.
Right.
And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's quicker than that, but refreshing my feed. Yeah, we got a hello in there, so it's my daughter Cheyenne. Hello, Cheyenne.
Hello.
It's 13 years old, getting into this kind of.
Oh, wow. Good
a little deal. Bit of this, and some things, not really intensely, but she's getting. I'm just glad that she's kind of interested in this topic, because it's. Yeah. I mean, once you get into it, it's like you just keep getting drawn deeper and deeper, because there's so much. I mean, it's on so many levels, like an umbrella company. There's just so many, cover areas, and we can go into that. So
yeah, and it's all interconnected. It seems, on different levels. So.
Absolutely. So you want to, let's go with the let's start with the Kandahar giant. What do you know about how Kandahar giant, how people that came forward and how it was covered up?
Yeah, so the Kandahar giant's really interesting. I recently did a show on it, and the story is really compelling. There's some eyewitness testimony to it. And some secondary corroboratory information as far as people who talked to the actual unit that this happened in. But the occurrence was from a team of Army Green Berets, and they were sent on patrol through a mountainous area outside of Kandahar, Afghanistan. And it was a very dangerous area, and they go missing. Completely radio silent, nothing. And usually you would give a, signal that you're engaged in some sort of combat or something like that. Right. No signal at all even made it through. So after so long of them not answering, they dispatched a secondary team of Army Green Berets. And this team started tracking, and they found an area where apparently the first team had gone up to this path that seemed fairly wide, and they thought it was a goat path because a lot of goat herding in that area. And they described this area as just being so remote that they felt like they were on a alien planet. They were like, when you get to Afghanistan and you're in those mountains, it's like another, other place, And they keep going down this trail, carefully looking. They're thinking, this might be a good place for an ambush. As they continue, they find some bits and pieces of Army equipment that are just laying on the ground. These bits and pieces become more and more. There's pieces of the radio that they would have used. Yeah. There's the last thing that you ever let the enemy get's the radio, because, and they usually blow those up. But here it was dropped and broken. And backpacks, all their equipment, basically.
Right.
And as they continue down this path, it leads up to this area where there were multiple openings, cave entrance openings. Right. And they're thinking this is where they're holed up, the people that, ambushed.
They're thinking it's insurgents and whatnot. And
yeah. This is where the Taliban is. They had to have ambushed them. It was so fast that they, couldn't do anything and couldn't even respond. So they take up a defensive position in front of the cave entrances just to see if they can see any movement. And the leader of the team, who only calls himself Mr. K because he obviously has, security, confidentiality agreements that they had to sign, but
non-disclosure agreements, so they don't lose their pension,
right? And
their retirement and all that.
What's amazing is, though, they found out who he was, and all of that had to be redacted from the internet at the time. This was a big deal at the time, and they deemed it secret. But he sees some quick movement out of the corner of his eye, according to his testimony. And before he could even look over, this gigantic spear, they said, comes flying out of the mouth of one of those caves, hits one of their friends, another Green Beret named Dan, and they said it went right through his body armor and was so big that it looked like it just almost cut him in half.
Oh, wow.
You know, and you're in a state of, you could see that happening.
Well, the staff was like, what, 10 to 12 feet long, and the blade on it was probably 3 feet long, almost like like a spear, but like times 10.
Right, you know, and I mean, you can imagine the strength and everything.
Had to have weighed probably 600 to 700 pounds, no problem, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know, insane amount of force to have to go through body armor and everything like that. And then, according to their testimony, the thing comes screaming and running out of the cave. They cried. They said it sounded like a war cry. Wow. It was wearing animal skins. It had long red hair and beard past its, shoulder length and everything. And it ran a sprint towards the guy he killed to retrieve the spear, apparently, to continue the assault. And they just mowed this thing down. They said it went down in 30 seconds. With their modern weaponry, they just killed this thing in no time. And they described it as being anywhere from 12 to 15 feet tall. They called it in. They sent in a helicopter to haul the body out of there. And it weighed 1,100 pounds.
Wow.
1,100 pounds.
Well, one of the listeners said that their neighbor served in Afghanistan, and he once brought it up, the subject, and he said to please change the subject and not talk about it. So I guess in respect to that, we won't discuss it, because if he served in Afghanistan, and if he could, some people might have to relive that or have heard about it, and they probably still get nightmares. So we will just end that subject. But I know what you're saying. Now, did you get this report from what was this, the Stephen Quayle disclosure, or no?
No, this was it actually in 2015. Mr. K, the leader of the thing, gave an interview where he was all blocked out, and before that was redacted. Many people got copies of it, so you get to hear his testimony. And then there's been a Navy SEAL that's come out and said that he actually encountered two of these people after it had occurred. And it's interesting because even the pilot of the C-130, which took the body out of there, talked about it. So a lot of corroboratory information there.
Right. I mean, that's just scary to know that people have, all those non-disclosure agreements. But we will move on. Do you, let's see, with military, do you have anything on the Philadelphia experiment? So, I mean, that was wasn't that like a time travel portal kind of going on? I mean, I know it kind of originates from Aleister Crowley's with Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, where they opened up a portal, and supposedly it was by the Roswell area out west.
Right.
And then after that, everything started happening.
Yeah, I actually produced a whole video about that.
I think I've seen your video. That's why I was kind of asked, because I forgot to mention that. But I was very impressed with the details and how informative you had that report disclosure brought out. I mean, it was very it was all across the board, just everything, how everything took place with each person, and it was perfect. I mean, I couldn't.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I realized most people hadn't heard that story before. How bizarre it really is. Yeah.
Well, not many people know that the founder of NASA was Jack Parsons, and this guy was the pupil of Aleister Crowley, and this guy Aleister Crowley was like the father of that they called him like the cult Satan worshiper, the leader, or the beginning, where he started a whole new religion, and it was like scientifical, and it went against everything. So they kind of put him up as like a devil worshiper. Right. Magic.
Such a threat to like established religious people at the time, because this is way back at the turn of the 19th century. So you can imagine, in 1940s. And Jack Parsons was a star pupil. I mean, it is just insane to me that all of that truly happened. And it led to the founding of Scientology. I mean, the craziest series of paranormal events.
Yeah, that's right. Vincent said that the first description of alien grays was Lamb. That was the guy that they called him Lamb. That's what the name that he gave him. And I remember the picture. The picture of the head was the perfect, attribute of a gray alien. It was dead on to what everyone says they look like.
Yeah, and I had somebody make an argument. They were like, well, couldn't he have, that was just around Roswell, couldn't he have seen it, and it drew the picture afterwards? And I'm like, who do you think where they were just parading these things in this body around, letting people draw it? And it was too funny. But
yeah, man. Well, we can. Does anybody have any questions about like the NASA, the whole cultist, the Aeon Horus? Did you see that documentary called Aeon Horus? Because that's based on NASA as well. It's like their what they call it, their emblem. The whole NASA thing is a whole just a cultist of just a whole different. I wouldn't say satanic, but it's just based on something that's a dark and evil.
Yeah, like their symbols that they're
using. Yes, the symbols they use is like a serpent mixed with like something else, and that documentary is very good. It's probably got an hour and 20 minutes, but it's called Aeon Horus.
Okay,
it's on like Amazon Prime.
Oh yeah,
once you watch, there's so many good ones that they put on Prime, and a lot of times what they'll do is if they're viewed more than that they expect them to be viewed, they'll put them on the rentable part of Prime. You have to pay to watch it.
Right.
Like indistinguishable from Magic, which is not directed, but like the host is Nick Pope, and that's a really good one too. He does a lot of just dropping truth all over, because he was the prime minister of alien tech, not technology, but he was like the not Richard Doty, but he
was kind of like their Lou Elizondo.
Yeah, their Lou Elizondo, or like the Project Blue Book back in the early 90s. He was like the Alan Hynek over there.
Yeah, he was the guy that their Department of Defense put in charge of looking at UFO cases. So he's a really interesting and I think completely credible guy. He seems completely credible to me. But yeah. Disclosure is going to, hit people like a train wreck. I really do think that when they fully have to just finally swallow the jagged little pill.
Oh yeah.
It has deep psychological effects on people that have never entertained the notion that this could have ever happened.
Wow.
What do you mean? Our sci-fi movies came real? Our sci-fi novels came real? And you're like, well, kind of, yeah.
It's like they're giving us like baby shots of disclosure through all these movies throughout the years. Since Close Encounters of the Third Kind, maybe even before that, it was like a small disclosure, little bit, and then when they're ready to tell the public that these things are actually real, they're coming from another galaxy, dimension, portal, wormhole, traveling interdimensional through time and so on, and their technology is thousands of years greater than ours. I mean, no one's going to want to swallow that pill.
Yeah, and it seems by design to me that there's been so much of this imagery put out there decade after decade that have desensitized the public to the idea of aliens being here, and UFO movies and documentaries and things like that, that to me that had to be by some kind of slow effort design. And there's a lot of stuff, like if you examine the CIA's Project Mockingbird and their liaisons to Hollywood and how they were feeding them images to put into their movies, it's a very interesting rabbit hole that you can go down,
Wow. I've heard about some things like that they were kind of putting those ideas and images in these Hollywood actors, and they kind of put it out into the mainstream.
Right. And the X-Files is a prime example. Like, how many things in the X-Files now appear to be true? And Chris Carter is known to have had a meeting with CIA officials in a private meeting that he's never obviously discussed what they talked about. And I find that just really, really interesting.
I've never heard that in my, and like being in this, into this topic, and I've never heard that before. And that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of the X-Files stuff has to do with, there's always that elite guy that's kind of running like behind the scenes, and he's in charge of all this, and he's always the one that's somehow he's behind all these cases, and it just kind of makes sense how today's things are. There's always someone pushing that, puppeteer show to make things, happen, events happen in the world today.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it appears that what they did was behind the scenes on this whole UFO disclosure thing, that the government figured out how to keep a secret by piecemealing out this technology to private companies under black budget programs. That's how you keep a secret, is, there's special access programs. Nobody has a whole piece of the picture. They're each working on one little tiny piece of it.
Yeah.
And it's funny that they have no choice apparently now to come out and start talking about it. And these special access programs are running scared. And the reason why is because they've absorbed $2.3 trillion in a very short period of time that went into untraceable black budget programs.
Black budget programs, yeah.
And those guys who are running those programs, which are private companies, just robbing the government, just absorbing. The amount of money it takes to keep people secret about UFO technology is just piles of it. And these guys, of course, because it's black budget and it's so deep, top secret, they're not paying taxes on it. And so the General Accounting Office, who's now doing a full accounting of the whole UFO thing and the entire government, is going to go through and start auditing those dudes. Oh, wow. And they are panicked. They're probably
trying to break up chips, SD cards, breaking, getting hammered, all these laptops, all this information in it. They're probably trying to just wipe it all out and or send it to some kind of safety cloud for one of their umbrella companies to hold all their data. One of their
exactly, and that's what I've been told about disclosure. That's why it's happening now, is that it simply came down to money. They have spent that much money trying to keep UFOs a secret, and they've been unable to attract the right scientists to actually examine the craft and technology they have in their position, because all they can get are scientists who are willing to work in complete obscurity under total security and never be recognized for any of their findings or work or accomplishments.
Oh, wow.
And, and that's a hard sell in this day and age.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And on top of that, you have these companies, these major companies, GE, Panasonic, Motorola, Nextel, Hitachi, and so on. But all these huge companies were 20, 30 years ago, they were the ones putting out all this new technology because they were the umbrella companies getting all this funding, and they put out a little something for us to see. Oh, wow, cool look a cell phone. Oh, wow, cool look a pager. Right. They had this information 100 years ago. They're just kind of giving, like I said, little tidbits, a little bit here, a little bit there.
They were, if there's a guy named Colonel Lee Corso who published a book called Day After Roswell, and he talks about that program to disseminate some of the small technology. He talks about how integrated circuitry and fiber optics and all of that came from this crash debris.
Cellular data.
Yeah.
Cell towers, all that. It's amazing. I don't know. Did you get to watch that recent? I think it was the other night where they were charging $4.99 to watch the disclosure on the UFO Network program. It was Nick Pope. It was Travis. I think his name is Travis, the guy from
Travis Walton.
Not Walton. I think the guy. He's one of the hosts on Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh yeah. The NASA scientist guy.
Yeah, the physicist guy.
Yeah.
It's Travis. I can't think of his last name, but he was on it. Dr. Alejandro, another scientist, was on it, and then you had Linda Moulton Howe, and they were discussing disclosure. And Linda was saying something pretty interesting, because there's only like 120 people that signed up for that. They didn't probably get the audience they were looking for, because they were charging $5 to watch this, live stream.
Right.
Which wasn't bad, but like I said, Linda Moulton Howe was saying that disclosure kind of happened like the day as Roswell happened, like when they first put all this information into the newspapers, because that was all the true information. And the day after that, the U.S., the Navy or the Air Force, they made them redact all their articles, and they changed all their stories to weather balloons. So
yeah,
it makes sense. Like, it happened. And I've also heard it talk about people saying that disclosure happened with Close Encounters of the Third Kind because, Richard Hynek, or Alan Hynek, the scientist from Blue Book, he was kind of cooperating with Spielberg to make that movie. And he actually has a small part towards the end of that movie. We were talking about this last night.
Yeah. And, Dr. Hynek has already, I haven't really checked it, but it was due for release, a new book on UFOs. And it was about the crash at Corona and at Roswell, and it was being heralded by Linda Moulton Howe and Lou Elizondo and a lot of other people as being so well researched and documented that it was going to rewrite the history of UFOs as far as those events occurred. And so there's supposed to be some pretty shocking material in that book. So I'm glad to see he's still, out there and doing his thing. But
been around.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan, told Spielberg during the White House viewing of Close Encounters that he leaned towards him and somebody said that he told him, people will never realize how real this is.
Oh, yeah.
And, so obviously he was aware. Apparently he had his own UFO incident.
Yeah, him and his wife had an incident when they were flying out west, I think in California, before he was even president, when they were younger. Was that correct?
Right.
Encounter. So he kind of knew about him before he was even president of back in the 80s.
Right. So it's crazy. Yes, I never thought we would see this time,
Pretty awesome. I mean, he even mentioned it. I remember he gave a speech about, what if there was a threat attack from something other than, he said the threat from above is pretty much what he said.
Yeah. Oh, he used the words alien threat from outside this world.
And that was his whole selling point for when they had their Star Wars program, which a lot of people say that was the beginning of the secret space program. So what's your take on that?
I totally agree. And not only that, but there's a lot of information to show that there's some sort of conflict ongoing right now in space. There's a lot of very interesting videos coming off the moon that's showing what appeared to be craft shooting at each other. Oh, wow. And then you have the famous Navy or NASA video. I think it's the STS 19 video is what they call it, where there's they're watching a craft and it's coming into the atmosphere of the Earth, and there's a flash off screen, and this projectile goes right at the craft, and the craft has to dodge to avert it.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, they were in space, weren't they?
Yeah. And so, in space, like deep, and so you see something like that, and you have to ask yourself, is that part of the Star Wars program, or is this two other alien intelligences having some sort of conflict very close to us, Oh,
yeah.
So, that whole conflict in space thing and how it relates to disclosure, I think, is something that's an interesting path.
Okay, so we got to that part. We did a little aliens. Let's see. Patty.
Yeah.
1963. Who was it? 1963. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin.
67.
Bluff Creek, California.
Yep. So, the first thing, there's still skeptics about the Patterson Gimlin film. And that really amuses me. And the reason why is because I've done a lot of presentations about this, is that in 1967 in Hollywood, animatronics didn't even exist. And the number one costumes that had anything to do with primates were being used on the sets of the Planet of the Apes.
Planet of the Apes, yes.
Right. It cost them $1 million a day to dress those figures in those costumes. That was 1967. You hold up a picture of one of those costumes next to a photograph of Patty, and you tell me that some Hollywood artist conspired with two penniless cowboys to show up all the way out there in the woods to somehow create a amazing suit that can't be replicated even to this day, and certainly not then, and then to remain quiet about it and never say, oh, yep, I'm the one, I'm the guy, here's the evidence. They would wear that like a badge of honor, because it would show how skillful they were at creating this suit. That's never occurred. And that is very, very telling. People don't really pay attention to the age that was taken in. And there was a state investigator who showed up there the next day, and he found the footprints, and he followed those footprints, according to his own testimony, for 2 miles into the woods. So, you know, people don't actually often talk about those little.
They don't know about all those details that you're mentioning. So
inarguable details. I mean, look at that a picture of Patty next to one of those gorilla suits on Planet of the Apes, and there is just absolutely, it looks comical next to it.
Well, there's also, you got breast movement, you got hip movement, you've got some intense buttocks, like that's the hips. A lot of people say that she was either she was carrying or she just had an infant, because the way her body was structured as a female.
Yeah, a lot of people have asked why she's walking instead of running. That too is easily answered, because when you do a frame-by-frame analysis, the right thigh on the creature, it has a huge gash on it. She's injured, and so she's walking about as fast as she can walk. And the arm that she has behind her, and it comes back way behind her, has already been measured and acknowledged to be way beyond human dimensions, measurements, and she squeezes her fist at the end. In 1967, animatronics did not exist, so there's no way that you could have had an arm extension inside of the thing to pull some trigger of some kind to get the fingers to curl up as the hand went back. It just, that mechanism didn't even exist. And so these are all really inconvenient truths that are inarguable for people that are skeptics still of the Patty.
That's pretty intense. I mean, I said the stuff, I was just sending a message back. Like I told you, I can't message from my laptop. I got to do it from my phone. So it's pretty intense. Like the stuff that you mentioned about the patterns, like not many people know that they were, I mean, how long weren't they traveling out in the woods for like weeks before this even happened? And they were broke. I mean, they were using like a beat up 8mm camera as well. It wasn't like an 8mm camera, like they had to crank it.
They did. Well, it was at that time, it was actually pretty good technology for that camera. It was like the best camera you could get, but they had to borrow every penny to get that camera. And they had been out there for like 2 weeks, and it was an area where some people had said there had been sightings. So, you know, it was like they were targeting the right area. But
oh wow.
But yeah, for them to have gotten that kind of footage is, you know, stands today as the gold standard. I mean,
that's like, you know, the you know, ancient, like just as great as this, nothing really comparable to that. That's like the holy grail of evidence still. Like everyone reverts, like everyone says, like, why can't they get footage now? Like my thought is, you know, the way the cameras are now, everything is digital. I think there's a problem with the digital camera that makes these things look blurry, or they can't come up as a clear. But because they were using that old 8mm old technology, everything is so clear, and it takes it frame by frame on film. It's not taking a digital copy back to a, you know, image on the back of a camera or a cell phone.
Yeah, I've never heard that theory before, but that's really smart.
I came up with this within like a week, and I haven't really spoken about it much. But I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense, because the way those old cameras work, it's frame by frame, and everything now digital. It's all just kind of collaborating, you know, from one image and send it to circuitry onto your screen or your viewfinder.
Interesting point. That really is. That's something to really think about. You know, and the frame rate of how they're maybe vibrating in and out, you know.
Possibly. I mean, you know, everyone says there's a frequency that they work with, different frequencies, and that's why a lot of times they become blurry, or people will say like they're cloaking. And if you're not picking up on their frequency, you can't see everything that is really there, because you're kind of covering up with their frequency against our frequency, which 50, 60 hertz is our frequency.
Yeah.
Sound.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that they're using infrasound as a double, I think. One is long range communication, just the way elephants do. And one is a way to paralyze their prey shortly before grabbing it, like a deer or elk. And there's biological precedents for that, like in tigers, for example. Yeah, right as they begin their roar, they let out this little infrared sound that can only be heard by the prey. And it freezes them still just long enough for them to be able to get to them. And that same thing's been reported in a lot of Bigfoot sightings, where hunters have all of a sudden seen like a deer just freeze, and one of these creatures walk out and just pick it up and take it off with them.
Throw it on their shoulder, walk right up. Or with the hunters, they get that feeling of dread, or they can't move, like they're frozen, and that's the same kind of thing that infrasound can do. It can kind of freeze you.
Exactly. So
I'm wondering if I got hit with it when I was hunting, with my encounter, because I had that fear of dread and I was frozen. I couldn't move. I just kept shaking and my heart was racing, through my chest.
Interesting. I've had that happen a few times, and these days I'm carrying an infrasound detector.
Right.
So that when those happen, I can actually see if there's infrasound happening. Then I can be like, oh my God, yeah, we're close. Something's got to be close, But it's one of those mysteries I feel like is going to finally come to a close in the next year or two. I really do.
I think they're going to bring out the talk about Bigfoot, how they, they've been among us for how many years, and turn them up for.
I think there's an undeniable ET connection with the DNA, them being constructed. For what reason? That's the great unknown. And it was done apparently around 15,000 years ago, according to the DNA that was discovered. But these are creatures, I have to remind people, that have the genetic abilities of various other species spliced into them. And they have speed like cheetah speed over mountainous terrain, 65, 70 miles an hour. Can you imagine up, steep inclines and things like that? That's the kind of speed you're talking about. And
that's a blur too. If you're seeing something move that fast, that I'm not saying small, but compared to the size of a car or something moving that fast, low to the ground, that's going to be a big blur.
Right. And, there's a few species like reindeer and certain kind of antelope that can see an infrared light. Well, 200,000 game cameras are sold in the United States every year. And the vast majority are Bigfoot hunters who get these game cameras. Yet we haven't received a single real definitive photograph from any of them. Is an amazing thing. And I think it tells us that they're seeing an infrared light that they can't see. And and there's a biological precedent for that too. So
wow. That makes sense, because a lot of times people will say, I've heard these so many encounters over the years, even just recently, just people saying the one guy has the kill farm that was on one of the recent Sasquatch theory shows. This old guy talks about. I mean, he's no reason to gain fame or get rich or nothing. He's telling the stories like every time he goes out, all these trail cameras are just ripped off trees and smashed, and he decided to mount them with like a cage around them, like a metal, almost like a welded swivel kind of swing bar on these trees. And he said ever since he'd done that, they haven't messed with the cameras because they're bolted in and they're kind of have like a little sharp spike on. He actually caught some hair on one of these cameras from the spike.
Oh, sweet. That's awesome.
Pretty good interview. There's actually two parts, and I only got to the first part because it's 2.5 hours, but he actually takes you out in his fields and he shows you all the things that happens and whatnot.
Wow, that's really cool. I'd like to say I have not seen any of his stuff, but I would love to check it out.
Give me 1 second. We're having an issue right now. My producer, my wife, is telling me, she's showing me. So just give me 1 second, Jack.
Sure.
Can't see comments.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. I was just informed from my wife that For some reason, this happened last week when I was on StreamYard. I mean, we're still broadcasting live, but for some reason, the comments you're not allowed to. No one's allowed to comment now, and this happened in my live interview last week when I started getting it. It's weird because there's no on StreamYard. There's no any options to do this to change it that way, and there's no way to block people's comments when you're doing a live StreamYard. My only thought is that there's something tampering with maybe one of the servers or with my VPN causing it to happen with my broadcast feed, but I'm not going to let it stop us. We can still, we're just not going to get comments on the live stream.
Oh yeah, not a problem.
Well, we did have people commenting, but like I said, this happened last week, like almost halfway through, and I didn't even know because I'm asking my guests, like, does anyone have comments? And I'm looking at my screen because I can see the comments come up on my computer screen. I'm not seeing any comments, and a lot of people had a lot of comments for her that before the show that were excited. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. There's no comments. And then when I get done with the broadcast, my wife's like, nobody could comment on your show. This is crazy. I'm like, wow. Well, now it's happening again, but that's all right. We're still gonna let this ship sail because we're not letting it stop us.
Yeah, I bet you it's a VPN glitch.
It could be, but it's just weird that this is my second. And I've done this, I think, 3 or 4 times with the StreamYard, and this is the second time this happened with comments. And I like I said, I didn't do anything to any settings or click on anything I'm not supposed to.
Right.
It's just strange. But yeah, it could be like a VPN glitch, like you're saying, or some kind of internet issue, or maybe even some kind of StreamYard developer option that they changed up where if you're doing broadcasting, you're not paying for their top premier
I've heard that
package, your premier package for $29.99 a month, and you get all these cool options. Well, I guess they kind of cap you off like halfway through a live interview. I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Live upload, but like I said, I'm probably going to put this on YouTube as well.
Okay.
YouTube channel. Let's see. So we were talking about Sasquatch. Okay, Land Between the Lakes. Yeah.
The LBL, the ground zero for dogmen.
Dogman, attacked a family camping. You can go in because I've heard the story so many times, but if you want to go into that and just delve into that whole rabbit hole.
Well, that's part of what I've been presenting as my unified field theory of paranormal activity is that these particular kinds of crypto animals like Dogman and Sasquatch are part of the ET presence on this planet. And I say that because one of the geneticists that I know that I completely trust received some Dogman hair DNA. And what was amazing about that was that it showed almost identically the type of construction that they found in the Sasquatch Genome Project. The mitochondrial was Homo sapiens sapien, modern female. And then the Y paternal looked like it was a fusion. Came up unknown kind and canine, but with all kinds of weird animal genes that were fused into those sequences. And that led her to believe that basically this had to come from a singular source. It was too similar of a genetic finding. So and it's interesting because some CIA trained remote viewers were given dogmen randomly as a target, and they're all blind targeted.
Oh yeah.
A guy in some office somewhere at Langley determines a target, and it's a serial number, and that's all they get. And so they do their little reading, and they all corroborate. And they came back saying that they suspected that the dogmen were somehow a remnant of an alien intelligence, that they apparently had some sort of military use, and that they were living in the crevices of the world, basically, and that they were real biological animals. So I was just like, wow, because, the whole interdimensional, real biological breeding type thing. There's always a choice that you've got to try to narrow down.
Right. Would you believe that they were used in Vietnam as well? If they these seers were seeing military using them?
It could very well be in that the military has some of their own genetic constructions.
A breeding program or some kind of just maybe a super soldier faction that they release for certain certain missions that they don't want to have too many human casualties to let these things, go out, and if they lose 3 or 4, then, so what? They can breed more.
Yeah, exactly. And, when you look at some pretty compelling insider eyewitness testimony about Dulce, New Mexico, and then again about Area 51 and their deep underground, because it's the underground facility at Area 51 that's interesting, not what's happening above ground.
No.
And there's been some people there that say that there's human genetic chimera work going on, and that's obviously part of some kind of super soldier program.
Yeah.
So, to be producing dogmen-like creatures would be the most, perfect, soldier, a Sasquatch. Can you imagine the damage one of those could do? Just rampaging. You got 100 of those rampaging.
And speaking of rampaging, wasn't there recently a movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson called Rampage?
It was.
And it was a wolf, it was an ape, and it was some kind of lizard reptilian creature. And
right.
They were all given some kind of genetic dispositioning enhancement, medical treatment, whatever, research, some kind of bizarre, whatever antigen, and it it makes the gorilla a giant, almost like, George of the Jungle, almost King Kong. The wolf turns into like a, 30 to 40 foot long wolf, run around jumping, air catching helicopters with its jaws.
Yeah, and it looks like we're going to end up with a worldwide version of Dr. Moreau's island, so to speak.
I was just going to say, it's like the island of Dr. Moreau, where they just, whatever they can think of making, they're just splicing genes and mixing them all up. You got half goat, half man, half dog. I mean, it's all just, and you wonder about the cryptids that people seeing, like a goat man, a lizard man. I mean,
and I'm wondering if those were past genetic experiments, because like you and I were talking earlier, that there's an article out today about China continuing its human chimera experiments, clearly mixing any kind of animal DNA they can to make these chimeras. And there was actually some American funding going to that program, which hasn't been cut yet.
You were saying they tried to pass a law on cutting it, it died. So they're getting, kickback of U.S. fundage to fuel their chimera program, which also we talked about before, which even funnier, which in this country, the Senate voted no. But if they voted no to do it in this country, make it illegal and get to 10 years in prison if you get caught. Right. Well, it's okay for China to do it. And guess who's giving them money? We're giving them money, but we also said no. So we're doing it. We're still funding it, and we're probably partnering with them as well, as I'm sure our scientists are there, but they're doing it there because it's legal to do it there, because they've passed, that law to make it illegal here. And who's to say that they weren't doing this 20 years ago, making these, hybrid, creatures.
Yeah, well, and you can see how well that's connected to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, because they're already, and they acknowledge this, doing experiments where they're able to make soldiers where they don't need sleep. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that? They can keep them from sleeping for like a month without any side effects. And they're beginning to introduce zootropics, these, artificial pills and things that make you into a super soldier. And I think there's probably much deeper science going on where what if you could introduce a genetic ability of a wolf into somebody that could, travel at that kind of speed and could
smell something from a mile away, smell the enemy.
Right.
And what if they can do it with a nanotechnology where they just release it into them, little bits, and just that person has all those abilities of whatever whatever animal creature that they can put into that person to give them, super soldier attributes.
Yeah, and it's no longer in the realm of just science fiction. This is all real stuff that is possible right now.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, we live in interesting times, that's for sure.
Do you think anything of the mass sightings that people were seeing now, these cryptids, do you think anything has to do with maybe government chimera where they had to release some into the wild because people don't want to get caught with these hefty fines? Or, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
That could very well be the case. I also believe, and I've presented this a number of times in talks, that any sort of bipedal hominid cryptozoological animal is going to have some sort of ET connection. Even if it was a genetically modified something in a military lab, it's very likely that that was done with information obtained from ETs on how to do that kind of genetic work.
Right.
And that could be part of what we're seeing too, is that they're, like I agree, they're letting them out of the lab saying, take off, guys, what are we going to do with you?
That's kind of scary because like Planet of the Apes started as well. It was the same kind of deal. They were using what it was in the recent movie, The Planet of the Apes and the War of Planet of the Apes. They were using an not psychotic, but it was an anti-Alzheimer's drug that was being, in trials that didn't make it to human testing. They only got to chimpanzee testing. And what did it do? It made them smarter, made them walk upright on 2 feet, run. I mean, and it also made them have vocabulary, language to speak like us. So,
yeah. You're crazy. If you read the science paper on that very first genetic experiment that really made people mad with the monkey embryos mixed with the human, like that happened a month ago. The study came out, and it was a team of American, Chinese, and French scientists. And they had successfully fused human and monkey DNA into embryos. They did something like 107. Only 3 of them survived, but they survived for 19 days and up until they had to terminate them. And that created this big hoopla in the scientific community, of course, about ethics. But they make a statement in that paper that the reason they did it was because the species are close enough that the cells and the DNA communicate well. But when they're mixing DNA from like a pig and a human, those DNA cells aren't communicating in the same way. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to figure out how to make those communicate better, just like the DNA of the monkey and the human. Wow. You see how scary that is? Like they're trying to make that process more efficient. And you're like, why would you want to make these crazy pig people and lizard people and who knows?
Like I said, they're also doing like the artificial or like the body parts, the secondary body parts where, if say you can't get a transplant of a lung, they're saying also talking about breeding the perfect human pig hybrid to get the human lung out of a pig. So you're not wasting a human life. So but you're still creating that mixture of human and pig DNA. Right. So they're also going to be, however long that they let that live, they need the lung out of it. So what they do, they take the lung out and off, back into the burn pile.
Yeah, or the rest of it gets sold as bacon, and that's even more disturbing.
Bacon or any kind of this new stem cell research that they're, but that's pretty much fetuses, aborted fetuses as well.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Planned Parenthood is they're pretty intense into that fight.
Yeah, and you look at ancient history, which I've done a lot of, and you see these bas reliefs of these chimera animals that were, these were genetic manipulations that occurred in the past and in times when there were, ET intelligences here doing a genetic experimentation. A lot of people believe those are depictions of real creatures, a man with the lion's head or a man with the hawk's head and that kind of thing. So
owl's head, the birds, has that bird mask on, the one has the the dog face on it, and lion man, and just very different ones on it. I think one of them has this like a snake-like lizard type head as well.
Right.
Like crocodile almost.
Yeah. Yeah. And who's to say that that wasn't real human chimeras that were being constructed at the time?
And that was ancient technology that they were just passing through the technology today to make to kind of revamp that whole process.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I have no doubt there's such advanced stuff going on now and deep underground laboratories that would probably shock and terrify everyone.
Well, Phil Schneider, he was one of the big revolutionaries that kind of got that whole dumb deep underground base kind of in Dulce, Mexico, talking about they actually had a war with the aliens, and the Green Beret gave his life to get him out of that little cable kind of carry car from underneath that tunnel that they
yeah
down.
Yeah, and that matches a lot of the information I've received about how the aliens have been, especially like reptilian aliens, which is something that people have begun to pay attention to. Even Phil Schneider talked about it. We're kind of pushed into these deep underground bases, and then the military started building theirs, and they keep coming across, like he said, structures that were already down there that they were unaware of, and that was one of them. He popped through there, and all of a sudden, you're looking at an alien operation going on. I can't imagine.
And they found that by accident. Didn't they say like one of their bore drill bits kind of like kept getting busted? So they sent guys down there, and they said like once they got down there, it was like putrid, smelled like death, and it was dark and just horrible out there. And that's when they encountered the aliens.
Right. And Phil Schneider was murdered. We have to remember that,
he was strangled with a catheter wire, and they made it seem like he was a suicide.
Right. And so we have to, when they do that, he obviously was telling something that he was not supposed to tell.
He mentioned several times if anything happens, and we said he's not crazy. He said he never has any suicidal thoughts. He never will. So he said if anything ever happens to him, he said he pretty much said it blatantly that like he's not going to commit suicide, and if he dies, that's not how he died. So he kind of tells everybody how he was kind of just he was whacked by insiders.
Right. And man, it's interesting because I also follow a lot of stuff coming out of like the Webbot and Half Past Human and stuff. And it's weird because they use like just data trend analysis to come up with stuff. And they've come across this whole element of underground bases being found and aliens being dug out. So apparently at some point in the future here, because it's like a future prediction type of deal that they do, along with the disclosure, there's going to be like public acknowledgement of these underground bases. And people are going to become aware that there's alien bases in operation, and that leads to this whole effort to literally extract them out of the bases. So that'll be interesting to see how that comes out. So,
that's pretty intense to think about that. I mean, I don't even want to, fathom that whole, extracting them out of these bases, and that's going to cause a lot of retaliation.
Yeah, it really will. So, man, we live in interesting times.
They've been here like forever with these, their own bases underground.
They have, yeah. And it's interesting, though, because now once people have acknowledged the disclosure thing, they're going to start coming across at things like I was talking about on my show the other night. Lou Elizondo in a recent meeting acknowledged, they asked him, did you see material when you were head of ATIP? Did you see material about Majestic 12?
Right.
And his acknowledgement, yes. Would you elaborate? No. With that one statement, he completely acknowledges that Majestic 12 was real. How would he come across, or why would he see anything about what everybody's called a hoax document that was leaked, 3 decades ago or whatever it was, 4 decades ago? Well, inside that document, and I showed this on my show, there's an entire like half a page talking about how at the crash scene at Roswell, they discovered human bodies in the craft that had been dissected, and I quote, as you would a frog. So here's the guy who just was the head of ATIP acknowledging MJ-12 exists. Then we have the MJ-12 documents that were leaked, that even the typeset has been verified as coming from that same area. Then it's making the statements that, the people in this craft had dissected human bodies. You can see how this ends up unwinding into a very interesting scenario over time. So
there was dissected human bodies like frogs in their craft.
Yep.
And it makes you, that kind of goes the whole thing with the alien autopsy thing, because there was, I've recently heard about someone that knew a nurse that was kind of involved with that, and the pictures that we provided of some of the things was actually back when Roswell happened.
Oh yeah, and
they sent them back to like the Kodak developers, like the company, and they actually said that these were like Polaroid shots from this 50s.
It was, and this is what's really fascinating and current about the whole thing is that, so Ray Santelli ran the alien autopsy film, and then and he said he got the footage from a guy that had clearance back then, and he made yada yada yada, and then everybody kind of blew it off as a hoax. He said he didn't know, but it had to be hoax and all of this kind of stuff, even though it would have been very expensive to hoax it because everything in the room and everything was perfectly period piece. So you either had to have access to all of that stuff,
right,
or you had to manufacture it to create that entire perfect surgery room.
It's like a time capsule from that many years ago. Perfect.
Right.
All the instruments, tables, labs, coats, clothing. The lights as well.
Everything. And so, that's what struck me when I saw it. And then everybody was like, oh, it was hoax, yada, yada, yada. Well, just about a year ago, there was a memo leaked from Robert Bigelow's group. Mm-hmm. And Robert Bigelow's the guy, he's the black budget guy that has had the alien technology forever.
The owner of Skinwalker Ranch for how many years as well?
Forever, yeah. Bigelow Aerospace, the whole thing, right? Well, a memo got leaked out of his office, and it's a memo from one of his agents, one of his minions that was out doing field work for him. Right. And it says that, and this is coming from his guy, it said that he had a meeting with a CIA agent who confirmed to him that, in fact, the alien autopsy film was real. And I have a copy of that memo on my computer, and I showed it on my show. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And then shortly after that, Ray Santelli, like if you look online, he put up one of the negative sequences of the film, actual negative of the film, up for auction with the actual paperwork from the CIA confirming that it's real for $1.2 million.
Holy crap. It probably sold in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Unbelievable. So, and that just happened like last week or the week before. So I don't know if he sold it, but.
Do you do any following on Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer? What's your, do you like, I know he has unacknowledged documentary, and he's got another documentary. I think there might be a part 2, but there's another one that he does that was recent, and it talks about like the alien hybridizations. I mean,
and
stuff that they're taking, abductions are taking us and using us for a hybridization program. So they're because their bodies can't handle our atmosphere. So what they're doing is they're making hybrids with our half DNA to kind of be able to withstand the environment that this world's evolving to.
That could well be the case. I'm not really sure what the motive behind the alien abduction program and the DNA and the hybrid program. It clearly is or was in existence. I can tell you over the past couple of years, the number of abductees and phenomenon has gone down to near zero. And that was expected because all of the abductee testimony over 40 years was saying that they were working on a program and they were approaching the end of it. And at the end of it, it wouldn't go on anymore. Well, apparently they succeeded in whatever that program was. And according to their testimony over 40 years, and this came from Bud Hopkins, Dr. Johnny Mack, Dr. David M. Jacobs, Linda Moulton Howe have dealt with these people forever. Was that they were creating alien hybrids, and it took them 8 generations to make them now look exactly like us, and then embedding them into our society. But the problem is that they are neurologically superior to us, and that they have the ability to literally control human thought and emotion, and therefore action within a given distance. That distance is unknown, but it's been reported to us, that there is some sort of a boundary to how far they're able to do this. But the one thing they've never answered in any of those records over 40 years is the question of why. And that's interesting to me. You would think one guy out of 40 years and all that testimony, even if he made it up, would have come back and said, I asked them why, and they said, da, 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 and that's the reason why. No, we've got 100 of them that came back who said, I asked them why, and they said, I will not tell you. Wow. That's fascinating to me.
Maybe they don't want to tell us because they don't want to scare, make a huge scare. Maybe because, with everything, the way the world's going on, maybe our bodies won't be able to handle the atmosphere and their bodies can. And then with the hybrid, when they got that whole 8th generation perfection, maybe that can withstand, future atmospheres and evolve into something totally different.
Yeah, it's quite possible. And I will point out the fact that they do bring the abductees back. Whatever that is that they're doing, it's not something to they could just, if they wanted to do something with you, you just disappear and that'd be that. No, they bring you back for a reason, but not all of them do. So the reptilian aliens, which I can guarantee you exist, they don't bring people back. And I've been doing a series of videos and talks on my live program. So if people go to my YouTube channel, just Paranormal Intelligence Agency, I've got 19 videos on there, and each one is about a different paranormal subject. Abduction is one of those, and I present a lot of that evidence. So.
Do you go into any of with the reptilians with the adrenochrome harvesting?
I do, and I talk about it. In my videos, a lot of people don't know about the whole adrenochrome, so I just say an enzyme that they're very, very valuable to them, and that's why they're doing what they do. But
right? I mean, the best way to extract it from a human being is to get them very scared.
Yep,
right?
and torture, pain. If you can get them to die from what's called vital reaction among coroners, vital reactions where you die literally just from pain. There's a point where your body will just die because of the pain. That produces more of that adrenochrome than anything else, which is just insane. So torture is a big part of what they do. But oh my gosh, yeah, it's almost it's past 8. I've got to run, but
I know I told you an hour. We did a lot of delving into different topics. I would definitely like to have you on again in the future. Maybe say sometime between August and September, and we can kind of dip back into the whole topic of disclosure. And you can kind of go back into how things were said, because you probably have an idea on what's going to be brought out. And we can kind of just go into how you were right about it and how the people are acting and what else is going to get dropped. And maybe they're going to start talking about Bigfoot being real, which obviously, they've already, the whole Army Corps of Engineers Almanac back from 1979 shows a Sasquatch in it. So what kind of better disclosure than to put it in your own Army Corps of Engineers Almanac from 1979 or 78 or maybe the early 80s. But there's a Sasquatch is put into that almanac. I mean, what better way to say something's real than to actually put it in the government, almanac?
Right, and then not advertise it. And then when people say, "Well, you knew they were real," they can pull it out and say, "Yeah, and we told you. It's right here."
But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. You have a far margin of knowledge about a lot of everything, and I definitely look forward to having you on again. And you're probably going to get some more requests to do more shows from other people and other groups that I'm involved with, because everybody's fascinated with your work. I mean, you do a great job. And I've been a subscriber for quite some time, and I'm just looking forward for your next upload, because I mean, it's just some of the things you bring out, it's mind blowing. And if you're not awakened to how the world's turning out, you won't know nothing about what you're saying. But once you're woken to how things are actually to be, everything will kind of make sense, and what you say just kind of brings so much sense out into interpretation. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I truly appreciate it.
An honor to have you.
Yeah, but thank you very much for having me, and anytime, just let me know.
Appreciate it. You have a great night and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
All right, you as well, sir.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.